And welcome to another edition of the Action Network Fantasy Flex podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, here with Sean Koerner, as always. And today we'll be talking about wide receivers, and we have a very, very special guest, my former partner in crime at 4 for 4, one half of the DFS MVP podcast back in the day when I was a part of it. My guy, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4 for 4. TJ, I'm really glad to have you on. Thanks for coming on. What's going on, man?
Yeah, man. Good to be back. Good to be talking to you guys. Just gearing up for the season like you guys. I mean, I've been out in these best ball streets pretty heavy. So, I mean, we're going to be talking ADP today, which I think people might just be getting accustomed to. But we've been on this grind for a minute, right?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of fun for me because this is the first year I've gotten really deep into NBA, and NBA obviously took so much longer than it usually does. So it almost feels like back in the day, just kind of jumping into fantasy, and it feels good. It feels good. Sean, how you feeling this wonderful, we're recording this on Monday, and it rained. It rained in Southern California, Sean. What's going on, man?
Oh, did it?
Where I was, it did.
We live in different climates. That's how far apart we live, I guess. Yeah, believe it or not, Raybon, it does happen. It's rare, but it does rain here occasionally.
Yeah, not my favorite, but it's also Throwback Thursday for everybody out there. So TJ, I see you with the jersey. Why don't you tell them what you're rocking?
Yeah, I got the 2015 Eric Decker Jets. Arguably my best DFS year ever, mostly because we're getting Eric Decker for $6K every week. They wouldn't raise the price. So throwing that, and then if we're in the green, I got to rock my Ace. So the Ace technically isn't a throwback, but it has the 50th anniversary patch commemorating the A's 50th year in Oakland. So that year they went to the Kelly Green every Friday home game. From 68, now they're pretty much just using the Kelly Green as much as they want. But one of my favorite hats, and it matched the Decker, so I figured I'd throw it on.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm a Giants fan. I'm from New York, obviously, but I honestly will give the Jets. I think the Jets have the better jerseys, especially throwbacks. I actually own three Jets throwback jerseys. I'm not even going to tell people because I'll let them see them as they kind of unfold. But Sean, I think this is the first time somebody's rocking a baseball hat on a pod challenging your hat game, man.
True. Love the A's, so love the hat game. But yeah, this is an NFL pod, TJ. So.
Yeah, no, I had to give a little love, to the A's if I'm having my green on.
Yeah, man. And I got on the 98 Randy Moss. This is one of my favorite jerseys. I actually traveled to the Mitchell and Ness store in Philly to get this throwback. It was impossible to find online. So rocking the 98 Randy. This is one of my favorite wide receiver seasons of all time and one of my favorite receivers. So that's what we're doing. But let's get right into these wide receivers. TJ, I'll start with you just because we're kind of switching gears. We were talking with Silver and Ratcliffe about quarterbacks. Now we're talking wideouts. So what's your kind of just general wide receiver strategy heading into this year specifically, because it kind of changes year by year depending on the ADP and stuff. Yeah. So what's your kind of general strategy in fantasy? And I know you've been playing a lot of best balls.
Yeah, draft as many good ones as possible. I mean, unless I'm into the top 4 picks, we are always kind of depends on your ADP or how you're going to start out your draft, right? So if you have a top 4, top 5 pick, pretty much consensus running back, and I think that's probably the sharp move. After you get to 6 is when you could really start making decisions. So if I'm in the back half of the draft, it's usually a wide receiver or a tight end for me. Ironically, because Kelsey and Tyreek are right next to each other, I don't get as much Tyreek because I like taking Kelsey there instead. So even though he is my wide receiver 1, I just don't end up with him that much because of that reason. And then I like to get another like a high-end tight end and then just keep loading on pass catchers because the position is crazy deep. So you think the argument would be, well, then you don't need a top guy. But I really just want as many close to top 24, top 12 wide receivers on my team, especially in PPR leagues, 3 wide receivers in the flex. I'm trying to start 4 wide receivers. I'm comfortable enough that I can figure out my running backs, especially this year. Like you said, we're seeing kind of ADP of those mid-tier wide receivers jump some of these, what we've called the running back dead zone before, but now they're kind of becoming outside of the dead zone because they're falling so far. So I always kind of default, if I'm not in the top 4 or 5 picks, I default to the 0 running back strategy a lot just because I love loading up on pass catchers.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it really does kind of depend on your draft choice, I think. Sean, do you kind of where are you at with this strategy? Like, is top 4, top 5 kind of when you're first thinking about wide receiver? And I really thought what TJ said was interesting because we've talked about this a million times. So, like, are you also on Team Kelsey over Team Tyreek?
Yes, I'm on Team Kelsey over Tyreek. I just think the drop off of the positions too massive to pass them up. And, the wide receiver position, I don't go in with a specific plan. But, like the drop off is just gradual through the entire position. So I usually pick the times where, like running back, we'll talk about it in this pod, but running back, when there's a steep drop off, I target running back, I fade receiver, knowing I can get, an equal wideout a round or two later. So I think wide receiver, I have the most flexibility. Like TJ said, in best ball format specifically, you just need to load up. Yes, it's deep, but there does reach a point where you don't want to be stuck taking, like John Brown as your wide receiver 4 or something. So you want to just be targeting it as often as possible, but strategically. So it's, I go on every draft with an open mind when it comes to wideout.
Leave it up to us on a wide receiver 1 pod. John Brown is like the second wide receiver mentioned.
We have Eric Decker and John Brown talking.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all we need is like a Nelson Aguilar reference, like Kendrick Bourne or somebody. But all right, so let's jump right in because according to the Fantasy Pros consensus average draft position, Tyreek Hill in PPR, across the board, but I'm using the PPR. Tyreek Hill is the number 1 wide receiver taken. TJ, I know you're going Kelsey over Tyreek more often than not, but is Tyreek Hill still number 1 on your board? And who is there anyone that kind of is a challenger to him that you think maybe before the season you would think about changing that?
Yeah, when we recorded before we recorded this morning, Ian Rappaport basically said that it sounds like Aaron Rodgers is going to play. So with 100% Aaron Rodgers playing, the volume that Adams gets with a comparable scoring rate to Tyreek Hill just over the last 3 years, I'm taking Adams. Now that we know Adams probably my 1.06 after the top 5 running backs, I'm throwing Zeke in there with the big 4. So I actually do like Adams over Hill now that it sounds like we're pretty sure that Rodgers is playing.
I mean, I know there's a wide receiver pod, but I do like that Zeke call. Like we did a pod a few weeks ago, and I was like, my favorite like dynasty target even is Zeke right now because his value is just so low. So I do like that call. Sean, where are you on this Tyreek versus Devontae situation, given the news we just got about Aaron Rodgers, which it looks like he will be back in Green Bay, but only for this year?
Yeah, so I have Tyreek just a little bit ahead, but you can't go wrong with either. I think Rodgers is coming off of just, a historic season. He had a 9.1 touchdown rate. So, Adams, I don't think he's going to score 18 touchdowns again, but I can't really argue taking either. I do like Tyreek just because, he's still in his prime at 27. Patrick Mahomes is only going to get better. I mean, Patrick Mahomes hasn't even technically hit his prime yet. So I like the idea of just investing in the offense as much as possible. And the Chiefs really they leaned on Tyreek even more in the second half of last season. He had 10 targets in 5 of the last 7 games. So we could see that massive usage again this year. And he has a super high ceiling. We know that, but he does have a high floor now. He had either 85 scrimmage yards or a touchdown in 13 and 15 games. So he's going to get you a great score every week. And he chips in those rushing stats that you only realize when you're making projections that he offers, a higher floor with that as well. He had 3 games with 20 or more rushing yards, chipped in a couple rushing touchdowns. So he adds that as well. So he's still my number 1 wide receiver. And we saw, he'll have weeks where he'll single-handedly win your matchup. Like that game against the Buccaneers where he had 200 yards in the first quarter and 3 touchdowns. Like he has that insane ceiling that I love to get as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the only thing that kind of tilts me toward Devontae, if Aaron Rodgers is good to go, is that like in KC, you have this Tyreek and Kelsey situation where I don't think it's just defense dependent. Like there's stretches where the defense is like, okay, we got to take away Travis Kelce. He's our number 1 guy we're taking away. And that's what you kind of saw down the second half of the season. Tyreek is going to go off a little more. And then certain time, if Tyreek has a big game early in the year, maybe defenses, try to take him away a little more for the next 6 weeks. So I think it's a little more volatile. Whereas at Green Bay, and this is why Aaron Rodgers wants to leave, they have nobody there. Like Devontae Adams is going to get triple covered, and he's still going to get open, and Aaron Rodgers is still going to hit him. He scored double-digit touchdowns in 4 of the last 5 years. He's had more than 1,370 yards in 2 of the past 3. So I don't think you can go wrong with either. And if I'm in a best ball, I'm probably going like, 55% Devontae, 45% Tyreek if I have that pick 100 times. But I lean slightly toward Devontae as long as Aaron Rodgers is good to go.
Yeah, Rodgers might just do the middle finger. I'm throwing 95% of the time, and 85% of them are going to Devontae.
Yeah.
Like with the 17-game season, Devontae might see like over 200 targets this year.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that to Sean once. I think it was last year. It's like Devontae Adams is Aaron Rodgers, like fuck you target. It's like
exactly.
It's right. It's like, okay, you guys don't want to give me anyone to throw to. You want to give me Devin Funchess and all this other, like, okay, like I'm just gonna throw to Devontae every time. And Devontae is kind of like, oh, y'all gonna triple cover me and not get me no help. I'm still gonna get open. I'm still gonna break ankles. So I like that. I like that combination a whole lot. As do Tyreek and Mahomes, obviously. But I always have to remind people, I think, when we do a new, number one receiver, number one, whatever position podcast, the first few rounds, you're not going to win your draft. Like, you're not going to win it. So don't stress over Devontae versus Tyreek. Like, the only way that's really going to screw up is if one of them gets hurt. And, they're both still in their 20s, both of them, relatively healthy in their careers. So, I wouldn't stress it too much. Let's go to, and it's an interesting top tier here because Stefon Diggs, number 3 in ADP, TJ. I mean, this is another guy. He could conceivably finish number 1 with the way the Bills started throwing it around the yard. And unlike, he actually has guys around him that take just enough pressure off of him to where he could catch those, 8-9 balls a game. What do you think about Stefon Diggs in relation to the top 3 and in relation to DeAndre Hopkins is going 4th?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think sure, Tyreek and Devontae are clear 1, 2, I think, but I think that next tier 1A or whatever, like you said, I don't think we really need to be crazy nitpicking about who we're going here, just that we have them together. We have these super high volume guys in Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins. And I guess we'll probably get to this discussion in a second. I say in Calvin Ridley now too. But yeah, the Bills are an offense where he's going to be the clear number 1 there. Like you said, they're good. They're not going to have any great guys there. Emmanuel Sanders is good. He's just going to be another good guy. He's, 34 going to a new team. Obviously an upgraded quarterback, but he's not going to cause Diggs to go down to 8 targets or something like that. Diggs is going to get his. And people look at this Buffalo offense last year. And I think a lot of people sometimes get in the trap of saying, oh, this team's going to regress only because they had big numbers. Big numbers doesn't mean a team's going to regress. Their scoring rates were pretty much on par with how they were moving the ball. They were just moving the ball super effectively, and they decided, hey, we're going to throw as much as possible. I think they had a game where they ran 5 times or something because passing works with this combo, with this team, and Brian Dable's down to do that. So I actually don't think this offense is one that's really going to use the word regress much. I think they can really sustain what they're doing, like we've seen with the Chiefs, with the Packers.
Yeah, and passing just works, period. The Bills are one of the smartest organizations I think in football. So it doesn't scare me. When a guy's on the Bills, it's I'm never scared away. Even the running backs, I feel they'll probably still pay off their ADP. And in Stefon Diggs, I mean, Sean, how many touchdowns do you have him projected for this year? Because he's never actually had a double-digit touchdown season. He's 8-9, 6-8 the last 4 years. So he's got some room to grow.
Yeah, he has some room to grow, but I'm projecting him 8.1. So not projecting the double-digit touchdown outcome, although that's certainly possible. But, like TJ mentioned, with the Aaron Rodgers news, I have Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams in tier 1 all by themselves. And there's a bit of a drop-off. And then you have this next tier where I have Diggs at the top. He's my number 3 wide receiver. And, he was a key factor in Josh Allen's year 3 breakout. But so is offensive coordinator Brian Dable. So the fact that they retained both guys, I think there's going to be enough continuity on this offense where I'm not expecting much regression at all. Dable dialed up the second highest pass rate in neutral situations. He dialed up the most play action dropbacks for Josh Allen last year, which I think was a huge part in his success. So, this is an offense I want to invest in. That's why I do like targeting Diggs if he falls to me, at the end of the first round. But yeah, like I said, this is the beginning of like the second tier of the elite wide receiver ones for me.
Yeah, and I think Diggs is just he's really impressive because remember the year before in Minnesota, he like the volume wasn't the greatest, but he was like the league's leading deep ball receiver. And then last year he's the fantasy wide receiver 3, but he's number 38 in deep yardage. So like he can just do it a bunch of different ways. That's why I like Diggs. And then we get to DeAndre Hopkins. I do have Diggs over Hopkins. TJ, what do you think about Hopkins? I know that he's been in the news a little bit, but the bottom line is, he's going to be there in Arizona with a pretty good offensive mind in Kingsbury, good quarterback in Kyler, maybe getting some help at wide receiver. They got more in the draft, and AJ, of course, I don't know how much he can do, but what are your thoughts on DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah, I think regardless of the new players there, his situation should be relatively similar. Like we saw Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald next to him, he still did his thing, and those are the kind of volumes that the new receivers might get there. They're going to throw it up to him. He's going to get his targets. Like the worry going into the offense last year was, is he going to be able to maintain this crazy dominant target share? And he did, which a lot of people were surprised by. I tend to maintain that wide receivers that demand crazy high target shares usually keep those because there's a reason they have high target shares, because they're really damn good receivers. So they're smart enough to keep giving it to him, throwing it up to him. I don't even have a knock on Hopkins. It's just that I think where ADP is wrong right now, or consensus ADP, is that Calvin Ridley should be ahead of him.
Ooh, Sean, what do you think about that one? That's your guy, Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, that is not hot. I agree with TJ 100% there. That's not even a hot take. I'm all for that. But yeah, last year we saw Hopkins ADOT drop a bit. It was 9.0. But they gave him a ton of high percentage throws, so he had a 72% catch rate. And despite the low ADOT, despite the low touchdown total 6, which is insanely low for an elite wide receiver, he still had a massive weekly ceiling just based on his target share. So he actually tied Devontae Adams for the league high with 8 games of top 12 wide receiver value weeks. So he does still have a massive ceiling, despite certain things about his playing style that doesn't contribute that. So I love him. Although, like you mentioned, he is in the news. There's a little bit of uncertainty there if he'll play this year. I guarantee he'll probably play. But when it comes to like this tier, if there's any uncertainty, I just break the tie by, picking somebody that's less uncertain. So that's why, like Calvin Ridley, I would take over Hopkins right now.
Yeah, I don't think I'm there yet with Ridley, and I love Ridley, but my one, like, I think there's some uncertainty with Ridley too. Number one is we really don't know how exactly Arthur Smith is going to affect that offense in terms of the volume. And I say that only not because I think they're going to go back to like, what they did in Tennessee, which is obviously predicated on having Derrick Henry, but because the Falcons did have like an outlying number of pass attempts over the last couple of years, right? Like they were not just like, they are the most pass heavy team in the league. Pretty much throughout, the last 2 years with Ridley here. And, if that just goes back to like league average or a little bit above, that changes things. And also, this is really going to be his first full year. Like I know he's had some big games without Julio, but this is going to be his like first full year as that number one every week in, week out, having to deal with that coverage, that primary coverage, all that. With more time to plan, whole off seasons for these defensive coordinators are thinking like this, as opposed to like, oh, on a given week, Julio's out, we'll just change that, our game plan. So I still think Hopkins can I think Hopkins still a more skilled receiver. So I still have him over on Ridley, but I could certainly see the argument for it. And it's another situation where in best ball, probably going like 60, 40, 65, 35 Hopkins over Ridley, but by no means would I fade him. And then another guy who I think this is where another, volume kind of comes into play, but another guy who's extremely skilled, entering his prime, quarterback who always is going to put up numbers, so it's going to be there, is DK Metcalf. TJ, is there a tier drop off for you between Hopkins, Ridley, and then Metcalf, or is Metcalf kind of there for you as well?
Yeah, I think Metcalf is kind of where we start tier 2. Like I think the guys we talked about are tier 1A and 1B kind of. I mean, the concern is I don't think they're going to be this crazy run heavy team that they were before, even though they did go back to hashtag establish the run after, the first 8 games or whatever. But at the same time, Metcalf, that 8 targets per game that he can see in that offense, that's quite a big difference from 9.5, 10, 11 targets per game. That leaves room for a lot of volatility. And yeah, I mean, he can be, he is tied to Russ, and he is going to put up these big games because he is a high A dot guy, but a lot high A dot and sometimes lower targets can lead to some really bad bust games. And I think he'll have a couple of those in the bag and leave owners really frustrated. You're not going to take him out of your lineup, but I think there is a clear drop off. Again, I'm putting Ridley back up there with those guys after Ridley and Hopkins to DK.
And Sean, what are your thoughts on Metcalf? Because, it is a volume thing with him more, first and foremost. So where is he kind of tier in for you?
Yeah, he's at the bottom of the second tier. So I have Diggs, Ridley, Hopkins, and then Metcalf, then Jefferson. So, I think that Metcalf, you're sort of buying in on his upside because we haven't seen him hit his peak yet. So I like getting guys before they hit their peak. So I'm willing to overspend on a guy like DK. I do believe in him. I think, it's possible that Shane Waldron is able to unlock, Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf's, true ceiling. So, he's a guy where I think his floor is so high that I don't see him busting at this range. So the fact that he has number 1 wide receiver overall potential, I'm all for targeting him right here.
Yeah, I should clarify. Like, I don't think he's going to, like, none of these guys in these top, 6, like, I'm taking all of them where they're going. Top 7, I should say. But, I don't think DK is going to bust. I think he can have some bust weeks, but I don't think he'll bust.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting to me because I'm high on DK. I mean, he's actually going ahead of Ridley in the consensus ADP. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's different for different sites. But Metcalf's actually at 5, Ridley at 6. The reason I'm really excited about DK is because listen to the way we're kind of talking about him. Volume is a problem. Will they unlock Russell Wilson? Will they go, be as maybe they won't be as run heavy as they were in the past. Seattle was 17th in pass attempts last year. DK Metcalf finishes the wide receiver 6. Tyler Lockett finishes the wide receiver 8. There's a lot of production to go around on this team, and it may not have even hit its ceiling if Seattle can jump into that top 10 in pass attempts or something like that. So and that's, Lockett, he's been pretty healthy these last couple of years. I think Metcalf is more likely to stay healthy. He's a little bit, just based on his body type and whatnot. So I mean, I think the sky's the limit for Metcalf. I have no qualms with taking him in the top 5. I wouldn't take him over Hopkins. I could see the argument for taking him over Ridley just because, again, I think there's, if the Falcons go to a normal amount of pass attempts, Russell Wilson's better than Matt Ryan and so on. And I think Metcalf's a better receiver than Ridley. So it's I'm not down on Ridley, but I could see Ridley anywhere in that 4 to 6 range. Where not locked into any one of those spots. And I love Metcalf. I think Metcalf could finish if he gets a little more volume, because he has room to grow. 129 targets of all the top 6 wideouts. He had the fewest targets at 129. So there's room to grow there. Justin Jefferson. Now, TJ, this is another guy. I mean, the sky's got to be the limit for him. First season, 1,400 yards and 7 scores on 125 targets. That's just ridiculous production per target, which you do expect to regress a little just because that's godly, that's Hall of Fame level stuff. Yeah. But I guess the question is how much regression and is he still, does he have one wide receiver 1 overall upside? I guess is the question.
I don't know if he has wide receiver 1 overall upside because I love all the other guys ahead of him so much, but I don't think he's much of a risk to finish below his ADP. We saw last year, you said they were a crazy efficient offense, the Vikings passing. Obviously that had a lot to do with Justin Jefferson being there, but Cousins was also being very efficient when he was throwing to Adam Thielen. So I do think the offense as a whole will regress. What I do think will maintain is that over the second half of the season, we saw Justin Jefferson get that really huge target share that he didn't have in the first half. average 10.1 per targets per game. That puts him on track with like the top 3 or 4 guys in the league. I think that's the part that stays, that huge target share. And Thielen is the one that gets hurt more from the offense's regression, and probably Kirk Cousins' regression as well. But we see year in and year out, like the reason that we're really confident, we're nitpicking these Tyreek Hill, Calvin Ridley, Devontae guys, is because we know that guys that can get that 10 plus targets per game, they're just going to ball regardless of how mediocre their offense might be, or regression might come into play. That volume is just unmatched. And I think Justin Jefferson reaches that like 27% target share league tier that we love.
Yeah. And that's something that you pointed out earlier, TJ, like guys who get target shares are very sticky. And that kind of translates to another stat, which is a little less known, but it's the same idea, which is just targets per route run. And like, that's really what's going to kind of carry over. And so when you see a guy like Jefferson, put up good numbers in that area in year one, you kind of only expect it to continue. And I mean, there's really no one else. It's Thielen, who's I would say still on the downside of his career, but like those two guys are just locked into such a huge target share. And then you're going to have Smith and Cook kind of fighting for scraps, but the target share is kind of very locked in, I would say, in Minnesota. You're not really going to have much at the last wide receiver spot. So the sky's the limit for him. Sean, what do you think of Jefferson?
Yeah, I agree. The sky's the limit with Jefferson, where I think, you can make a case for him being the wide receiver 1 in like dynasty formats. But for this season, I have him as wide receiver 7. The passing game definitely benefited from the Vikings defense being below average for a change last year. So it kind of forced them out of their run heavy ways. I think the defense will be a lot better this year. So that could hurt them a bit. And one of the things that the only concern I have with Jefferson, it's not really his fault, but he and Thielen both posted a dud around 25% of the time. They finish outside of the top 60. And that's more of a symptom of this offense has a pretty low floor. If they get a big lead, they're going to run the shit out of it. It can hurt a guy like Jefferson. So that's my only fear taking him, is he has a little bit lower weekly floor than other guys in this range, but I consider him and AJ Brown to sort of be the end of the wide receiver 1 like locks. So I'm fine scooping either Jefferson or AJ Brown here before the position takes a decent drop off, and then it's pretty much have 8 to 10 receivers almost projected identically after them. So I do like scooping, or I like having at least one receiver before these two are off the board.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. It's like we're nitpicking between these guys, but I think the biggest takeaway is, and TJ, you kind of hit it at the top, is I think going wide receiver heavy early in drafts is completely viable. Obviously, you're not like it kind of, you want to have running backs, but you have to go with the value. And so I think waiting on quarterback comes back into play again, because it's like everyone always tries to get around it, or whatever not, but it's so important, because if you have a chance to take a tight end, you want to do that. But like there's these wide receivers now are higher floor than the running backs, just because the league has turned it into a passing league. Would you agree? Like it used to be running backs were the higher floor picks early. Now I think wide receivers are.
Yeah, I mean, I think outside of maybe Christian McCaffrey, like there aren't any running backs even close to them. People say, Saquon Barkley's up there with them, and like it's not. I mean, teams are throwing so much, and when you get these guys with like these 27% target share, 10 plus targets per game, they are insanely consistent, and that's why we're taking them. Why we're super comfortable taking them in first rounds a lot now, a lot more than we did even just 5 years ago.
Yeah, and just to like underscore, when you look back at like the league averages, you go back to like 2010 and the league average pass attempts from 2010 and before, it was never high. It was like in the 33s, 32, 31. But since it's been gradually climbing, and, last year it was 35.2, 34.9 in 2019, 34.5 in 2018, and 34.2 in 2017. And the efficiency's been climbing too. So, this is something that's real. It's that, there's an extra pass attempt or 2 per game, and that's why the landscape has shifted so much. But I do want to talk about another guy that's very, Sean, you mentioned him, AJ Brown, because I think I'm going Jefferson ahead of Brown, because I look at both of them. Both of them could be in, you know, somewhat low volume offenses. I don't love that Brown is getting more competition in Julio, but I just look at like Jefferson in year one compared to Brown, and Brown had a great rookie year, like 1,050 yards, 8 touchdowns, but Jefferson had 1,400 yards. So like, it's kind of like, okay, his year two, I'm expecting like there to be a jump. Whereas Brown, you know, there's a little more a wider range of outcomes. TJ, like, what do you think of AJ?
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling, not even just in this podcast, but kind of all summer. Well, not all summer, but since the trade, that the Julio trade, if he's in this tier, or if he's where the tier drops off, because of the reasons you mentioned. They were the Titans were 30th in neutral pass game rate last year, and I know they have a new offensive coordinator, but they promoted within, which kind of suggests that things shouldn't change much. I think as long as Derrick Henry's healthy, I don't see this just because Julio's there turning into a team that's throwing it 40 times per game or something like that. And I mean, when Julio's healthy, he's still a baller. He was on pace for 90 catches, 1,300 yards last year, man. I mean, can he be on the field for 10 games? I don't know. But unlike Justin Jefferson, who we saw last year trending towards that, you know, really high target share, AJ Brown was at 25%, but with Julio there, I don't know if it really has room to go up. I think it might stay the same and it might be fine. But again, he relied on touchdowns last year. He scored on 10% of his targets last year and was still barely a wide receiver one. Can he maintain that? That's almost impossible. So if he can't, he would need his targets to go way up. I don't see that happening either. So I think he's like on the fringe of even a wide receiver one. I don't think anyone's going to rank him 13th, but I think finishing outside the top 12 is really in his range of outcomes this year.
Yeah, and I hate to say it because I love AJ Brown as a player. I don't think he's a guy that, like, again, I don't think we've hit a wide receiver yet that, like, I would say a fade at his ADP. But, and I'll throw this to both of you, TJ. I'll start with you. Like, out of the guys we've touched on so far in the top 8, I would say AJ Brown's the most likely to bust. What would you say?
Definitely most likely to bust because of kind of the things we said, and the first player that I'm like really passing on. If I'm coming back in the second round and it's between all of these receivers and Kittle or Waller, AJ Brown's probably the only one I'm passing on for one of those tight ends.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, his ADP seems about right. I think it is closer to his ceiling. So, you know, I would agree that, you know, if you fade him, you're probably not going to lose your draft because of it. But I love investing in wide receivers entering year 3 at the age of 24. You know, 2019, it was Kenny Golladay and Chris Godwin. I just had so many shares of that. Last year was Calvin Ridley. That's AJ Brown this year, but, you know, his ADP is number 8. So there's only so much room to grow. So that's why I'm looking elsewhere, like the wide receiver 2 range for guys with like massive upside. Whereas Brown, like you guys said, he does have a lower floor just because he does rely on that efficiency, and we can't really project him to maintain this efficiency year to year. So he does need that volume to kind of raise his floor. But yeah, I'm with you guys. Like, I'm okay passing him up here. But again, I think this is sort of the end of the true wide receiver 1 tier for me.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, I think, you know, year 2, year 3 guys in their early 20s, they're not usually going to bust. I'm just kind of relatively to the rest of this field. I think he has the highest. I mean, every once in a while you do get like a Juju Smith-Schuster or somebody that, you know, starts off a little better and then it kind of goes downhill a little bit due to, you know, whatever. There are some of those factors, I think, present with AJ. But Michael Thomas, here's an interesting one because what was it this time last year? I mean, we're talking about him potentially as, you know, do you take him over like Zeke or Saquon or somebody like that? Now he's the wide receiver 9, TJ. There is uncertainty in New Orleans. Is that enough to drive Michael Thomas down to the number 9, or is that still too high, or too low? Like, what are you thinking?
They're saying 7 games, right? Now, is that what came out last week? That he might not be back to week 7 with his ankle surgery. Yeah. So I mean, I don't even think he can really be on my draft boards if his ADP stays anywhere like in the top 24. I don't know how I draft Michael Thomas, not even know if the Saints are really bad and they're 2-6, are they gonna be like rushing Michael Thomas to come back? Or if they're 2-5, are they rushing him to come back?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, like, it's funny because his ADP really hasn't, and that's what I'm kind of, you know, hinting at, is like this is a guy he has that number one wide receiver upside, but his ADP really hasn't adjusted for the news, which is interesting. And I think it will, but I mean, that's always like, I personally, I'm kind of on your side. Like, I don't really like to take guys that are injured heading into the year. Like there's a difference for and it sounds crazy, but I'll take a guy like Will Fuller, like ahead of his ADP more often than I take a guy like, Michael Thomas or Deebo Samuel last year. I think it was, like, I really think that's like, you're putting yourself at somewhat of a disadvantage just because these guys are going at a spot where it's like, these are valuable picks. But Sean, I know you kind of like taking some risk with some of these guys sometime. Where are you on Thomas?
Yeah, normally I do like to take like an injured guy like this. Usually ADP overreacts the other way, but I'm with you guys. Like if you look at, the date filters for ADP sites, I saw like for best ball 10s, he's still being drafted in the 18 to 21 range after the news broke. So I'm out. Like I rather have T Higgins or Jamar Chase. Like why not? So he would have to fall, I would say, like outside of the top 25 for me to even like think about taking him, because even when he does return, there's still question marks like who's going to even start at quarterback, how that's going to work out for him. And he might not even be 100% at all this year. I don't like taking wide receivers specifically that are dealing with a foot injury. So there's just too many question marks for just give me T Higgins or Jamar Chase in that range instead. And I'm happy and not to deal with the headache of Michael Thomas. But yeah, a lot of the times I do take on this risk, but in this situation, I'm fading completely.
Where do you guys think his ADP will settle at? Over the last 2 days on Underdog, it's wide receiver 19, but that still seems crazy high for someone that could miss half the season at least.
25. I'm
25.
saying settle at 25. Like you said, once there's more clarity that, like, I would say if he's like actually placed on the PUP list, I think that would trigger it to drop to 25, even 30. But I think people are just optimistic. He's just going to miss a couple of games right now. So all you need is one person in the draft to really like him, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's why I think eventually it'll settle in the 25, 30 range.
Because he's on the PUP list now, just not. He's on the training, like the
right.
Yeah, so I guess
they have a bye week 5, so I could see them just being safe. Put him on the PUP list, and then he returns like week 7, I think it is. So
yeah, this is. I mean, to me, like we talk about a guy like this is a guy that he should not be going. Like his ADP should be dropping precipitously. But this is a guy that could bust. And I think it was another one, like much more so than even a guy like AJ Brown, who we're just kind of nitpicking and talking about him relating to like the other top 8. Like Michael Thomas could bust even if he was completely healthy, I think, just because of, what we've kind of, Drew Brees is a special kind of quarterback that they had a certain kind of offense with Brees where they had to kind of rely on Thomas because Brees, couldn't get the ball as far down the field as he wanted to. So, I mean, there's a lot of question marks with Michael Thomas, especially given the news. But he's on the PUP right now, not officially on the regular season PUP yet, but that is expected. So I would take his ADP with a grain of salt. Let's move on to Keenan Allen, who, Keenan Allen, just one of the best route runners in the league. TJ, he's got a quarterback entering year 2. He's got Hunter Henry no longer there. Jared Cook comes in. That's probably a positive for Allen in terms of target share. Any thoughts on Allen? This is another guy I think has number 1 receiver upside. We've seen him do that for stretches. What are your thoughts on Keenan?
Yeah, Allen's a weird one for me because to like stay up in this tier, he really needs a lot of red zone targets. He will get those. So like his volume is going to be kind of similar to a lot of the guys we've already talked about, but it's not the same type of volume. He's a weird player. Like a lot of players that gets this much work, you'll see their air yard share well above their target share. So like a Calvin Ridley last year, it was crazy. But he had 25% target share with like a 40% target share. A lot of people you see around like 23 with 35% target share. Keenan Allen's one of the few guys that has lower air yard share than he does target share. So it's just kind of a long way of saying that like he really needs touchdowns to compete with these guys, and they need to be touchdowns near the red zone, near the end zone. So he just isn't going to boom as much as these guys are, and I think that keeps his weekly ceiling down a little bit and his overall season ceiling down a little bit as well.
Sean, where are you on Keenan Allen?
Yeah, this is where wide receiver really opens up. I think you can make a case for like 6 to 8 different wide receivers to be in this slot. So I'm not a fan of taking guys atop of a tier. I like taking guys at the bottom of a tier. So I'm probably fading, but at least with Keenan Allen, you know what you're going to get. I mean, right, you're going to get 100 plus catches and 7-8 touchdowns. Just write it in. So he provides value that way. But at this point in the draft, I do prefer upside. And one of the slight concerns I have is, he's turning 9 this year and his efficiency is starting to drop. Last year he had a 1.82 yards per route run, which is his lowest since 2015. But like you mentioned, he's such an excellent route runner. He's always open. He's going to get targets no matter what. Hunter Henry's gone. The wide receiver 3 role is sort of wide open. So he's going to get a massive target share. But give me Mike Williams way, way later around, the wide receiver 40 range. I rather invest in Mike Williams in this offense.
Is it actually Mike Williams season? I keep seeing it, and I haven't been convinced yet.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Definitely at his ADP. He's definitely worth it as ADP. But I think Keenan Allen will obviously outscore him, but it won't be as much as the difference between ADP.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about yards per route run. Even if you just look at yards per catch, a lot more basic of a stat. But 2017, 13.7, 2018, 12.7, 2019, 11.5, 2020, 9.9. So, TJ, to your point, those air yards, they're going down. He's not able to do as much per catch. And so another guy that he has upside, but he has downside. I think it's fair to kind of put him in the top 10 in PPR because like Sean said, 100 catches, but like I like a guy like Terry McLaurin, who's another young guy that really probably hasn't hit his ceiling yet, but really impressive his first couple of years. What do you think about Terry McLaurin for 2021, TJ?
I love Terry McLaurin as a player. He's probably one of the best all-around young wide receivers in the league. He has really shined in Matt Harmon's reception perception, which just shows how great a receiver he is. I think his role and this offense overall aren't as exciting or maybe have more speed bumps than people might realize. Curtis Samuel coming over there. Curtis Samuel was another really good receiver that just really got misused for some reason last year. Like we saw, you just talked about ADOT, like that's usually one of the stickiest stats from year to year. And last year, Curtis Samuels fell off a cliff. So he's going to give McLaurin a lot of competition for those high volume, deep targets. We know that Logan Thomas is still there, and then they got 2 running backs that catch the ball pretty good. Everybody is talking about like, listen, I'm all about the Ryan Fitzpatrick life, Fitzmagic life. I'll buy him in best ball, but like a lot of people are talking like he doesn't offer downside in an offense. He offers a lot of downside in an offense. There's a reason he hasn't had a continuous starting job for a long time because he'll mess up a lot and turn the ball over and ruin the offense for you. Like he'll boom, but man, he could bust an offense too. So this offense as a whole has a lot more downside than I think people are giving it credit for this year.
I mean, I actually disagree on the Samuel part. I'm actually worried, and Sean, we've talked about this too. So I'm curious to kind of hear you weigh in, but like, TJ, I think Samuel was misused 2 years ago. I think he was used exactly right last year. Maybe not for fantasy. Like maybe we didn't want to see his ADOT go down for fantasy, but as far as I can tell, he's just not good down the field. Like, so it's like in 2019, he had a high ADOT, but he was very inefficient. I think his catch rate was like around 50% or something like. And last year, you saw
he was also catching balls from Kyle Allen.
Yeah, which is fair. But like last year, you saw the ADOT go down, but I think he was more consistent. He kind of put up similar numbers. It's just in a different way. And I'm actually worried that for him specifically, that they do try to use him the way they did in 2019, because there is history and connections there. From Washington to that Carolina season in the coaching staff and whatnot. But the fact that they got Adam Humphries kind of worries me, because Humphries has to be your slot, which does put Samuel on the outside. But either way, I think all of this uncertainty to me is just great for McLaurin, because it's just like, all right, he's going to continue to be the target monster, because I just don't think Samuel gets open downfield the way he does underneath. But Sean, I mean, like, where are you on this situation?
Yeah, again, like I love Terry McLaurin. I think he's a great receiver, but this is the range where I'm usually just waiting on guys that fall to me at ADP because I think the next 6 to 8 guys are interchangeable. McLaurin's been able to put up solid wide receiver 2 numbers with Case Keenum, Dwayne Haskins, and Alex Smith. So I'm excited to see what he does with Fitz. And I did a little dive, like deep ball accuracy and like what kind of targets he was getting. At 65 wide receivers saw 10 plus targets of 20 air yards or more last year. McLaurin actually saw like the 13th highest rate in terms of catchable balls, but he was only able to haul in, at the 31% out of those 31st catch rate out of those 65. So you could put that on him. So, I think Fitz will give him more deep balls to catch that will kind of make up if this inefficiency sort of continues. But like you guys are mentioning, there's only so many targets to go around. You have Curtis Samuel there. Adam Humphries we're talking about might be more of a target hog than people are thinking. Logan Thomas still, you have great pass catching back. So I'm just a bit worried that McLaurin's target share is going to take a dip this year. So I'm not. I do have him ranked 10th as well, as ADP, but I'm just not willing to buy there because I really do think that that's probably his ceiling.
Yeah, I think I'm willing to buy it. I mean, more so just because of the age. I think he's just a really safe pick. I don't think like what's going on around him is going to affect them much. I mean, you had Logan Thomas have a career year. You had JD McKissick have a career year. I mean, there's guys that could like lose target share. If Fitzpatrick's turning it over or making risky throws, I don't think it really affects. It actually is probably good for fantasy because Washington's defense is going to be good. And I think that more than anything would give me pause about a guy like Terry McLaurin is that, the defense is so good that they might not have as many of those shootouts as a guy like Keenan Allen. Cause I don't think the Charger defense will be very good this year. Right? Not as good as it's been in years past. Another player kind of similar, the defense has been kind of trending down a little bit. But this guy has been getting the target share, and that's Allen Robinson. TJ, what are your thoughts on A-Rob and him in relation to guys like Keenan Allen and Terry McLaurin?
Yeah, I think like in this tier, like the back half or the back third of wide receiver ones, he's the one that I'm most likely to draft. We've always talked about like if Allen Robinson never had a good quarterback, then he would be the wide receiver one every year. Obviously, that's like a little hyperbolic, but you know what I mean. So I mean, we don't know if Justin Fields is going to start right away, but we do know that Allen Robinson is going to be the one. They just got rid of Mooney, and I don't think that was going to affect his status much.
Miller.
Miller, I'm sorry. I don't think that's going to affect his status much, but he's going to be the number one there anyway. He 10 plus targets per game guy. I think he's one of like 5 or 6 wide receivers with 100 catches in his range of outcomes. For him, it's always how much can he get in the end zone. Obviously, Andy Dalton isn't going to make the offense as good. But if Allen Robinson can find the end zone 7 or 8 times, he's probably one of the safest picks in this range just because of that 100 catch upside.
Yeah, I think, I've been high on him, higher than most these last couple of years. I love, age 26, age 27 the last 2 years, still age 28. So still in his prime. I do worry a little bit about, more quarterbacks, but he's had Mitch Trubisky. He's had, he's had to kind of deal with this, with like a substandard quarterback already. He's had Bortles. He put up a big year with him as well, although also a bad one. But I think he's one of the more kind of unexciting, unsexy picks. Sean, where are you on A-Rob?
Yeah, I feel the same. He has a safe target share, especially after Anthony Miller was traded away. It's going to be a competition between Daz Newsome, Marquise Goodwin, and Damiere Byrd for the number 3 role. So, he's a safe bet for a bunch of targets. But again, this range, I'm more willing to kind of fill my second running back slot with like a David Montgomery or Chris Carson in this range, and waiting to get like, CeeDee Lamb, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp a round or 2 later when James Robinson and Chase Edmonds are being taken. I think just there's such a big drop off at running back from here to the next couple rounds that you can get a similar, I'm projecting Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp just for like 2 to 3 points less than A-Rob. So that's why I love A-Rob, but just I'm more willing, just based on my draft strategy, to punt at wide receiver in this range and just target a running back in most of my drafts.
Yeah, I think I'm not punting yet. I think I'm still taking guys like A-Rob, like, and that's the thing. It's like we're kind of nitpicking between them, but in reality, I do want as many of these guys as I can get. There's still a lot of question marks in the running back tier. I do like some running backs kind of in that late round 0 running back tier that TJ mentioned earlier. But yeah, there's not as much to say about A-Rob just because he is kind of locked into the target share. You do wonder about the quarterbacks, but the bottom line is he should get 25 to 30% of those targets. And if the Bears defense kind of keeps trending downward, it's not going to matter who the quarterback is because there's going to be more than enough volume up for grabs. So we got a good amount of time. So I want to kind of dive into this one a little bit, which is, and I'll start with you, TJ, like of the guys we haven't mentioned yet, could be any ADP, but I guess we'll start nearer to the top in that wide receiver 2 range. Who do you see that who's not in the top 12 in ADP right now, that has that top 12 upside?
Yeah, so the 2 guys that really stand out to me are more towards the bottom of the range. I mean, there's a couple receivers that I think Sean likes, but I don't want to steal his thunder. But the 2 that really stand out to me are Cooper Kupp and Tyler Lockett. Cooper Kupp is in a passing game with a super concentrated target share between him and Robert Woods. We saw Robert Woods finish as a wide receiver 13 last year with basically the same volume, while Kupp was down wide receiver 24, I think. But that really just came down to touchdowns. I know Robert Woods has a little bit of rushing upside there that's not accounted for with Kupp. But Kupp only scored on 2.4% of his targets, and that came with a huge drop-off in red zone. He was 10th in red zone targets from 2017 to 2019. He was 37th in red zone targets last year, so I think we see that bounce back a little bit this year with more efficient offense with Stafford there, and I think that scoring normalizes a little bit. I mean, in this team, I don't know if Kupp, like if he breaks the top 12, it's probably like as the wide receiver 12, but I think people are taking Woods 8 or 9 wide receiver spots ahead of him when really their seasons could look very similar. Like we could see Stafford support 2 top 20 guys and it could really come down to a touchdown or 2, which one ends up as the wide receiver 12 and which one's the wide receiver 18.
Yeah, I think Cooper Kupp, it's interesting. Cooper Kupp, I mean, I think Woods is getting a little slept on too. I would argue he has that same kind of upside with Stafford. But it's funny because Kupp, he has a great year, but he finishes with like, having not as many routes run. I think it was the year before. And then last year, kind of quiet compared to usual. And it's just all of a sudden people aren't talking about him, but they did upgrade at quarterback. They'll probably go pass heavier because of it. And then your offensive centerpiece, Cam Akers, goes down for the year. So like the Rams this could be like the past heavy, like Sean McVay's not playing around here. Like he wants to win. They've gotten really close. And if he feels like, Matthew Stafford to Woods, Kupp, Higbee, Deshaun is better than handing off to some combination of Darrell Henderson and Xavier Jones 25 times a game, which it is, this team could throw like 650 times. Yeah. So I would say Woods and Kupp are on that list for me. But Sean, who do you got? Guys that aren't going in the top 12 right now that have that like legit wide receiver 1 upside, or the most wide receiver 1 upside?
I mean, I feel like this one's too easy. It's CeeDee Lamb for me. He already flashed wide receiver 1 upside last year when he finished wide receiver 12 in weeks 1 through 5 when Dak was actually healthy. He should only get better in year 2. And he was I keep complaining about this, but he was only playing about 70% of snaps last year. So, they're moving around the formation. I see him as he should be over 90%, but anything in the 80 to 90% range, I think he has, low to mid-range wide receiver 1 upside. And Amari Cooper is dealing with this ankle injury. Who knows if he'll be 100% to start the year. So I love getting Lamb right now at wide receiver 15.
Yeah, if Lamb if his routes run don't go up, I'm gonna start calling him CD Cole Hardman because because it's like, bro, like why? Why?
No, but Sean said like it's kind of cheating, but it's kind of not, because there's like this weird thing when there are situations like Dallas where there's an insanely good offense and then they have 3 wide receivers going relatively high, 2 going really high, and people want to avoid them because they're like not all of them can ball. 1, maybe all of them can, and 2, I just want to be buying pieces of really good offenses. If we're not sure, you want to bet hopefully that we get the one that breaks out. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but this offense is going to be ridiculous, and I want as many pieces of it as possible. So the idea, like a lot of people, I think, will avoid it because CD and Amari are going so close to each other. I'm encouraging it, because if we knew who the wide receiver one was going to be and he's get like a 25% target share, that guy would probably go in as like the wide receiver 7 or 8. So in theory, you're kind of getting a discount when you do get them down here.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of the same thing with the Woods and Cup scenario, where it's like people don't want to touch him. And I have another one, and another guy that's going, again, now we're just talking about guys that have that top 10, top 12 upside, which everyone does, but guys that I think have the most. And it's another guy who is on a team where you have 2 guys and one is sexier, but Tyler Lockett, like every year people forget about him. He's going as the wide receiver 21. 2018, wide receiver 16. 2017, 19, wide receiver 13. Last year, wide receiver 8. He's staying healthy. He will have some duds, but I mean, everyone outside of that top 5, 6 will. And but when he puts up points, he's putting them up in bunches, and like he legitimately could outscore, all but like 5, 6, 7, 8 wide receivers in the league. This year, even with DK Metcalf hitting his ADP value. So, because that's what happened last year. Metcalf was 6, Lockett was 8. So he's another guy I think people sleep on way too much. He's ultra consistent, maybe not as sexy anymore as he used to be. But remember, Russell Wilson's throwing 30 plus touchdowns like every year in, year out. That's what he does. I believe it's 5 of the past 6 years. And Metcalf and Lockett are pretty locked in to that target share. So I love Lockett at number 21.
Yeah, you just said something right at the end that I think some people either didn't hear it all or like gonna be like, what are you talking about? You said he's super consistent. He all of a sudden got this crazy boomer bust label because his points came in these huge games last year. And I think people think that's the norm, but it's not. He's used in intermediate routes. He's using deep routes. Russell Wilson is one of the most efficient passers in history. It's a super concentrated target share. Like his season was an outlier, but he's not a boomer bust guy. He's a guy that could get you really steady points with a lot of upside.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think, a lot of times we get caught up in the Metcalf discussion about, well, if they finally unleash Russ or whatnot. But I think Metcalf probably is like in that 6 to 10 range either way, 5 to 10, like no matter what happens. He was there last year. But if Seattle does kind of open up the offense, I think it's Lockett who really benefits because, as you mentioned, he's the guy that, if you're doubling Metcalf over the top, Lockett's the guy that's going to go underneath. He's going to come out of the slot. He's going to get that like 5-yard out for the first down on third down. Like that's what Tyler Lockett can do. So I really think 21 is too low for him. And I think that's a great point, TJ, about just the pairings in general are kind of, they scare people away. So I do want to get both of you guys' thoughts on another pairing that the last year, Mike Evans was the wide receiver 11 on only 109 targets. He had 13 touchdowns. Any thoughts, TJ, on Evans and Godwin and just, this Tampa receiving situation? Like, do any of those guys have legit wide receiver 1 upside this year, or are there just too many guys there for that to be the case?
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards there's too many guys there. I don't know if we keep saying that like Brady has to fall off at some point. I mean, I don't know how we can just like keep projecting them to be as good as they were, and then he keeps doing it. But there are a lot of mouths to feed there. Godwin, Mike Evans. I know Gronk is the Gronk he used to be, but they got some pass catch running backs as well. And I mean, Antonio Brown. Don't forget the fact that like OJ Howard was seeing a decent amount of targets like before he got hurt, so he could throw like even if he takes away 1 or 2 targets from these guys, but it's already diluted targets, like that's significant. So if Brady's spreading the ball around, relatively evenly, they all kind of cannibalize each other. So I mean, Evans' touchdown share was just another guy like we talked about with AJ Brown that was just through the roof, and that's obviously not sustainable. And the way to make that up is with volume, and he's just not somebody that's going to catch 85 balls.
Yeah, Sean, where are you on the Tampa Bay guys in terms of like we'll talk about it more obviously, but just like on their wide receiver 1 upside, like what do you think their odds are?
I don't think you go wrong. It kind of brings me back to what TJ was saying about the Cowboys receivers. I think about it similarly, like we can nitpick them, but just give me one of them. I just like investing and pieces of the offense. I keep bringing up, well, first of all, I'm not betting on any kind of regression with Tom Brady. If anything, I keep saying, I keep getting flashbacks of that Peyton Manning first year where he had almost similar stats, and then the next year he broke records. Like, the fact that Brady did that with barely any offseason scares me. So, like, I want to invest in these Buccaneers pass catchers. Even a guy like Mike Evans, yes, he's touchdown dependent, but he scores touchdowns. So I'm willing to overlook that. I mean, week 3 last year was the most Mike Evans line ever. 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, give me that any day of the week, right? So I'm not going to nitpick these guys. I think there's a lot of guys in that range I'd prefer over them, but like investing in any bit of this Buccaneers passing game, I think is worth it this year.
And another guy who finished top 10 and was very reliant on touchdowns, but obviously is not going in as a wide receiver 1 this year, is Adam Thielen. And I know we're all pretty high on Jefferson and his sky's the limit in terms of his ceiling. But TJ, where are you on Thielen in terms of just his like wide receiver 1, like the odds of him repeating as wide receiver 1? Because I know you're big on the touchdown regression, and Thielen had 14 last year.
Yeah, and it's just not the touchdown regression, but it's kind of like we talked with about when we were talking about Justin Jefferson. Not only is he going to regress in the touchdown department, Thielen, but Cousins was just hyper efficient, like way more higher efficiency numbers he's posted in his career. And then we saw that target share dwindling away from Thielen and going to Justin Jefferson. Thielen, I believe, had the fewest targets out of any top 12 wide receiver last year. So with those touchdowns likely falling off, and we didn't even touch on like how run heavy this offense is when we were talking about Jefferson. If we have any concerns, like the person that's going to hurt is Adam Thielen. Like that's not going to change. So I think Thielen's numbers fall way off. I don't think he has any chance to repeat what he did last year.
Yeah, because like what I believe the average wide receiver touchdown rate in the red zone is around 25%, if I'm not mistaken, right?
25%.
Right. Okay. So just for context, I'm gonna throw these numbers out there for people. Adam Thielen last year, 19 red zone targets, 16 catches, 13 touchdowns. He scored on 13 of 19. You would expect more like 4 to 5 touchdowns. That's an 8 touchdown difference just on red zone. Like just, and 13 of his 14 touchdowns were in the red zone. 10 of his 14 touchdowns were inside the 10. He scored on 10 of 13 targets inside the 10. So yeah, Thielen, 13 touchdowns, 19 red zone targets, 10 of 13 inside the 10. I mean, what do you think about the potential regression coming from him?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of drive that point home, you said most of his stuff just came from the red zone. But if we look at his overall touchdown expectations, he should have only scored about 8 touchdowns. I do a study every year that looks at touchdown rates from basically every yard line on the field, so we don't just get like a rate that is off because of like those high red zone numbers. So even if we look at his overall number, he scored 6 touchdowns over expectation. That was the second highest in the league. And that study, those numbers almost always regress to the mean. It's been one of the most predictive studies I've done from year to year. So his numbers are going to fall way off. So yeah, I mean, I haven't even really been, I don't think I have maybe one share of Thielen so far this year. And that's over nearly 100 drafts.
Yeah. And he's going as the wide receiver 19. Sean, he is turning 31 too. Is that a guy? Because I know you like investing in guys kind of on the front side of their careers and when there's still room to grow. Is Thielen also a guy you've been fading, seeing as how he's about to turn 31?
Yeah, I'm probably fading him. Not so much because of his age, but we already mentioned it. Like the touchdown regression is coming. I'm projecting him for 8.7 touchdowns. But also, this offense, like I said. It'll probably become a little bit more run heavy this year with the defense likely improving off of last year. We know Mike Zimmer likes to, have a great defense and run the ball. So I just think that a little bit worried about the volume. But either way, I think when it comes to these top 2 Vikings receivers, they at least have, a locked in target share. We already mentioned, they only have like those 2 receivers and Irv Smith, and that's pretty much it. So I think you can't really go wrong with Thielen, but you really do need that touchdown stickiness to stay, but I'm projected for 8.7. So he's my wide receiver 21. I'm probably fading him at ADP.
All right, let's finish up with a couple of questions. We'll start with our top 5, our personal top 5 wide receiver rankings for 2021. TJ, I start with you.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it earlier. I'm going to give Adams the slight edge over Tyreek as my wide receiver 1 because we did get news when we're recording this today that it looks like Aaron Rodgers is expected to play. So after the top 2, I was really tempted to put Ridley as my 3. But I kept Diggs there. Like, we can't ding Diggs against Ridley. Like, Ridley's in an improved situation where he's going to be the target hog, but we can't ding Diggs when he's already in that situation. So Diggs 3, Ridley 4, and then Hopkins rounding out the top 5 for me.
What about you, Sean?
My top 5 wide receivers are Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stefon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, and DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, and I'm going for my top 5 wideouts with Devontae Adams number 1, Tyreek Hill number 2, Stefon Diggs number 3, DeAndre Hopkins number 4, and then Calvin Ridley to round out the top 5. TJ, our last question: most overrated wideouts in the top 12. I know we touched on it earlier, but who you got for most overrated?
Most overrated fantasy wideout, not overrated real wideout, in the top 10 for me is AJ Brown. He had a over 10% touchdown rate last year, scored 6 touchdowns over expectation. Only other receiver in the top 24 with fewer targets than Adam Thielen. Barely finished as the wide receiver 1 with 6 touchdowns over expectation, as I mentioned. And with Julio there, I don't think there's a lot of target volume to go up for AJ Brown.
Sean, what about you?
So I don't want to say they're overrated because let me be clear. These are 2 very talented wide receivers. I would love having them on my team, but Keenan Allen and Terry McLaurin, they just don't fit in my draft plan. I think they sit atop a massive wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 tier where you can get another wide receiver, in a round or 2 later. So I typically target a second running back around them, like David Montgomery or Chris Carson. And then a round or 2 later, guys that you were gushing over, Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp. So I just think that my draft plan, I typically fade these guys, not because I don't think they're good wide receivers. They just don't fit in my draft plan.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about guys who are most likely to bust in those top 2 tiers, it's probably AJ Brown, but I'm going to say most overrated on the overall top 12 is Keenan Allen, just because the yards per catch has been going down. The age is increasing, and we just don't know anymore if he can really still kind of give you those ceiling performances, even on high volume. And we started to see him struggle with injuries last year. And then I shouldn't even mention him because it's kind of cheating, because his ADP will probably be a bunch of spots lower by the time you guys actually hear this. But Michael Thomas should be nowhere in the top 12, much less the top 24. So those are my 2 guys for most overrated. TJ, really want to thank you for doing this. It's good to be back on the podding with you. Tell everybody what you're up to over at 4 for 4 and where they can find you.
Yeah, easy to find. Twitter is at TJ Hernandez. All of my work is at 4 for 4. We're right around the corner from DFS season, so we got a lot of DFS stuff in the works. Obviously, we've been talking redraft here, and I've been talking best ball off season. But August 1st, I'm turning that DFS switch on. We have a ton of great preseason content coming up, a ton of great studies, updating some great studies that the great Chris Raybon did back in the day. So those will be updated on 4 for 4, and then just a ton of draft and DFS content. So check it all out over there.
Yes, sir. Always love it. 4 for 4, one of the best sites. So be sure to check TJ out there. You can find Sean on Twitter at _oddsmaker. You can find me at Chris Raybon. Be sure to check out our fantasy draft kit at actionnetwork.com and download the Action Network app to track all your bets, all your futures, and see what we're betting on as well. That is going to do it for our wide receiver 1 pod. We'll have Matt Harmon on for wide receiver 2. So be on the lookout for that early next week. Let's get this money.